Right. We're on week 6 of our study of the return from exile. And we've just sort of crossed the border, as it were, from Ezra into Nehemiah. Nehemiah is an interesting character. One commentator that I was reading describes him as leaping off the page, much more so than Ezra did, even though both have passages of first person memoir style narrative. But we don't know a whole lot about Nehemiah when he starts out. He's focused on the situation. The only introduction we get is a sort of a third person, the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hekeliah. We don't know what tribe he came from, but we're about to find out where he was. Just out of, as an aside, Nehemiah itself means Yahweh has comforted. And this is happening in the month of Kislev, which for us would be like late November into December. In the 20th year, says the ESV. It doesn't specify in this point, but later on we find out this means the 20th year of King Artaxerxes of Persia. So we have a time, a rough historical period, and we have a location. He says, as I was in Susa, the citadel, the capital. So he is, and don't blame me if you don't know where Susa was. It's a World Heritage Site now. The archaeological excavations there have been going on since the mid 1800s. But it is not terribly far from the northern end of the Persian Gulf. It's in Iran, basically. And he receives visitors. It says, Hanani, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah. All right, so we've got this kind of setup, this picture that he is living in the capital city of the Persian Empire, and he has just received visitors who came from Judah. And he is extremely concerned to find out more news about what he calls the Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile concerning Jerusalem. So he is looking for a report on how things are going with that return from exile. Though he himself has not been able to return, we'll find out why later. His heart is there. And so he wants to know, how are things going? But the news isn't good. Hanani and his friends tell Nehemiah, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. And one source mentioned that if this were just the original, Nebuchadnezzar had broken down the walls and burnt the gates, it wouldn't be news. That's going on more than 100 years before this time. But there is a probable background for this in Ezra chapter 4. If you think back, we're talking about when they were opposing the rebuilding of the temple, do you remember me mentioning that the writer gives a sort of as if that weren't bad enough, later on, this is what happened. Well, this is the later on bit, is what we're thinking, because it's in the days of Artaxerxes that a bunch of people who were authorities in this territory called beyond the river, Samaria, Judah, onward, they write a letter to King Artaxerxes, a malicious and slanderous letter that says to Artaxerxes the king, your servants, the men of the province beyond the river, send greetings. And now be it known to the king that the Jews who came up from you to us have gone to Jerusalem. They are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are finishing the walls and repairing the foundations. Now be it known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and the walls finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, or toll, and the royal revenue will be impaired. Now, because we eat the salt of the palace, and it is not fitting for us to witness the king's dishonor, therefore we send and inform the king, in order that search may be made in the book of the records of your fathers. You will find in the book of the records and learn that this city is a rebellious city, hurtful to kings and provinces, and that sedition was stirred up in it from of old. That is why this city was laid waste. We make known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and its walls finished, you will then have no possession in the province beyond the river. King sent an answer. Remember, this is Artaxerxes speaking. Now the letter that you sent to us has been plainly read before me, and I made a decree, and search has been made. And it has been found that the city from of old has risen against kings, and that rebellion and sedition have been made in it. Mighty kings have been over Jerusalem, who ruled over the whole province beyond the river, to whom tribute, custom, and toll were paid. Therefore make a decree that these men be made to cease, and that this city be not rebuilt, until a decree is made by me. Take care not to be slack in this matter. Why should damage grow to the hurt of the king? Then, when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read, before Ram, Shimshai, the scribe, and their associates, they went in haste to the Jews at Jerusalem, and by force and power made them cease. It is thought that this is the backdrop behind the remnant in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down. Basically, whatever they had started to do had been undone, and the gates destroyed by fire, by force and by power indeed. And Nehemiah's immediate response is to sit down and mourn. Not just one day, but for days. He was in mourning, it's thought, for actually about almost 4 months. Because he doesn't actually give a, in this particular, like verse 4 doesn't say how long this went on. But when we get to the end of his prayer, he uses the word today. And then the next thing is mentioned is that it's the month of Nisan, which is March, April. So we've gone from the beginning of winter to the beginning of spring, that he has been regularly mourning, fasting, and praying before God. 3 months. And this is his prayer. And it's worthwhile looking at how it is structured. Because his opening, his address to God, right? We talk about forms of address. How do you speak? How do you greet someone in authority? There's a whole hierarchy, a whole etiquette about how do you address people in power. Well, this form of address that he gives, O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. He is not just giving the proper form of address. It doubles as a confession of faith and a reminder to himself. So you begin with, O Lord God of heaven. This is Yahweh Elohim Shamayim. Yahweh, of course, being the proper name of God, which is thought to derive from the verb to be, as in I am. And then, of course, Elohim is the divine nature. This was actually a plural noun in its original form. But it emphasizes, right, his divinity, And then, of course, God of heaven, quite often, right? If you were to say God of Israel, that suggests in that context that he was only the God of Israel. But God of heaven, how far do the heavens stretch? So the emphasis is on God's transcendent qualities, his power over all things. But then, in the very next breath, he is not just a great and awesome God, but he is a great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love. This is what they call his immanent qualities, his nearness to human beings. But then there's also that reminder, right? He keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. The reminder of the responsibility of the people in relationship with God. So this one introductory sentence pulls things back to their proper perspective. And as another aside, I'm learning as I seek to grow just how important it is to have these phrases ready when I approach God. Because it's not that I need to say the right things to him, but I need to have my perspective shaken up. Otherwise, I'm forever running to him going, help, help, whatever, or, oh no, not again, or, oh, why, But when you take something like this, oh Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments. This is who he is. And this is who I am to be in relation to him. And once he's established this, Nehemiah begins his plea. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant that I now pray before you day and night for the people of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of Israel, which we have sinned against you. So this is one man taking responsibility for the corporate sin, but also acknowledging, says, even I and my father's house have sinned. And it does, if you take this one way, it sounds like, well, even we sin, like we're so great. But think about it. Even those whose hearts are fully devoted to God fail. Even those who try with all they are come up short. And so the same with those who maybe just don't give it much thought and those who agonize over it. We have acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, and the rules that you commanded your servant Moses. And he acknowledges this because part of the covenant, as he is about to bring before God in prayer, is that there's a promise to the unfaithful as well as to the faithful. Remember the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though your outcasts are in the uttermost parts of heaven, from there I will gather them and bring them to the place that I've chosen to make my name dwell there. And now we've come to Jerusalem. And all of the history behind that phrase, make my name dwell there. You think back to David. Jerusalem was a Canaanite city, but David conquered it. And it was in Jerusalem, in the heights, that the angel of the Lord stopped in the midst of executing judgment. And it was there that David had purchased ground for a temple where the name of the Lord might dwell. And he was told, you're not the one to build it, but his son Solomon. He built it. And that grand dedication ceremony where they were calling on God to make his name dwell here forever. And now we've come all the way to the wall of Jerusalem is broken down. Its gates are destroyed by fire, and its remnant is living in shame. So Nehemiah has laid out before God, between the two of them, as he is speaking in private, pleading with God, that he remembers the covenant. And he's not reminding God as if God might have forgotten it himself, but to say, we rely on this covenant that you have made because you are faithful even when we are not. And you were faithful when we were unfaithful, and you scattered us according to your word. And now you've been gathering our people and bringing them back to that place where your name dwells. And so he goes on, this remnant, are your servants and your people whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand. And now it comes down to the really practical part. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name. And give success to your servant today and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. And he's like, oh, by the way, I was cupbearer to the king. We've heard this phrase before, cupbearer to the king. Back in Genesis with Pharaoh and Joseph in prison with the baker and the cupbearer and their prophetic dreams. The role of cupbearer was not just any servant. It makes me think of the studies that I've had in British history, where any role of the chamber, right, was highly coveted, no matter how lowly or demeaning the actual task was, because it meant that you were an intimate of the king. You were in a position to speak with him in privacy and possibly to bring up things that were of importance to you. Well, here we have this man who's not just in the capital, but he is the cupbearer to the king, and he is about to make a very bold move. If you remember, in the book of Esther, and no one just goes to the king of Persia when they feel like it. You have to be summoned, or if you come without summons, you have to be pardoned in order to stay. Well, this man didn't have to be summoned. He brings the wine to the king. It is his role to taste it to make sure it has not been poisoned, to provide to make sure that the king doesn't run out before he's finished. So he stands by. He is always present during the king's meals. So we have chapter 2. Beginning of spring, 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when the wine was before him, says Nehemiah, I took up the wine. I gave it to the king. And here we find that he has a fairly shrewd plan. If indeed that part in Ezra 4 is the background to Nehemiah 1, then we have a problem, because he has already been fed information that Jerusalem is a hotbed of treason, and that any action in its favor is likewise seditious. So how does Nehemiah approach this? Well, he uses his current position close to the king to display sadness. Now, obviously, when you are at work, you are expected to have a work demeanor. And that's even true of us today. But you think about if you were serving directly in the presence of the most powerful man, probably in their known world. So when he says, I had not been sad in his presence before, he had always presented a pleasant and a cheerful demeanor, as it were. You know, you kind of want to make these powerful people think that you're happy to be serving them, right? You don't want to give a sense of discontent. It can be dangerous. But here he says, I had not been sad in his presence, but the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing you're not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart. So he's made his opening gambit. He has displayed sadness to attract the king's attention. It's one thing to make a petition on a public and political basis. But Nehemiah chooses to put it on a personal basis. He sets his request on a personal footing by saying, let the king live forever, right? It's one of those stock phrases that you use to make sure the king knows that you're on his side. You're all in favor of him. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? So it's nothing really about Jerusalem as a political entity. This is entirely personal. He grieves to know that his heritage, the place where his ancestors are buried, is in ruins. He doesn't even mention the word Jerusalem. Although you have to understand, the king would know that this man was a Jew. And if he didn't know, he certainly is going to find out because he says, well, what are you requesting? He knows. He's played this game before. And so Nehemiah, he says, I prayed to the God of heaven. Very quick, silent prayer. And said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. All right, he's mentioned Judah. You know, this is a Jew, but he still has not mentioned Jerusalem. It's just the city of his father's graves. Totally personal. And the king does have favor for Nehemiah. This parenthesis that comes in, the queen was sitting beside him, suggests that this was a private interview, not a public meal, which reinforces for me the shrewdness of this because he's not making an announcement in front of any of the courtiers or other political figures who might have been dining with the king at an official banquet. This is a private meal for a private matter. But the king just says, how long will you be gone and when will you return? We're like, ooh, that's good. I like that. That's a good sign. So Nehemiah, in his shrewdness, gives a specific time frame, and he asks for specific resources. If it pleases the king, let letters be given to me to the governors of the province beyond the river. Those would be, I believe, the same governors who had written that previous malicious letter. Now the king, remember, Ezra 4, what was it the king had said? Make a decree that these men be made to cease and the city not be rebuilt until a decree is made by me. Well, here we have it. Give me a letter that they may let me pass through until I come to Jerusalem, and a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy. He's asking actually quite a lot. He wants authority. And he wants resources for this. And the king grants it. And just like Ezra and Nehemiah observes, the good hand of my God was upon me. If there's anything you learn from these joined stories of the return from exile, it is that things happen when you pray. And the things that happen really are the good hand, the gracious hand of God upon you. So, on to Jerusalem. If you remember, Ezra refused to ask for an escort, an armed escort, because he had told the king that God's power was for good to those who love him, and so he wanted to prove that to the king. Nehemiah's got a different problem. He's walking into a territory that is governed by people who are hostile to the Jews. This is one of those moments in the Bible I just kind of chuckle at, because it says, I came to the governors of the province beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. That must have been an awkward moment. I kind of like, so here we are. Here's what the king says now. And by the way, the king sent with me officers of the army and horsemen, a full imperial armed escort. This is not going to go over well. We have our first intimation of the current environment. Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant. I always think of Tobiah as kind of a toady, because it seems like everything he says is, oh, yeah, you're right, to whatever Sanballat says. So these two men, they learn all this, and it says, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. Old grudges. They don't get any prettier as time goes by. And they do not want Jerusalem rebuilt. They want to see Israel humbled into the dirt, humiliated. But the king had sent letters. And whatever your personal feelings, when the king says something should be done, it's much, much safer to actually go through with it. So Nehemiah continues on to Jerusalem, and he spends 3 days there settling in. You can only imagine just greeting people and talking and catching up with news. But then he gets up in the night. He says, I had a few men with me, and I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. Here we have another display of shrewdness, right? He makes a private survey of the problem, and he shows that he knows how to control information. Not surprising for someone who has been living at the hub of political intrigue and activity of Susa. He has not even told his allies what he has on his mind, let alone his enemies. But he goes out and he's going to have a look for himself, survey the situation, and assess just how bad it is. And it is bad. Not only were the walls broken down, but it says as he goes out, he's the only one riding a horse. So they're really quiet, right? One horse and a small group of men. And they inspect the walls. They can't even get around the whole thing, because if you look at verse 14, he says, went onto the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that was under me to pass. So not even one horse could get through all the rubble. So he goes by night by the valley, inspects the wall from a distance. We're talking about the Kidron Valley. There's a water source down there. And the rubble is so bad that he can't even get close. He can't even do a whole circuit of the city, really. So he goes back. And then in the morning, he speaks to the Jews who are living there. And here's his rallying speech. You see the trouble we're in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the walls of Jerusalem, that we may no longer suffer derision. And then he says, I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also the words that the king had spoken to me. So this is a really positive turn of events, and the people are not slow to jump on this movement. Let us rise up and build. And so they strengthened their hands for the good work. But it's never that simple, is it? When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they jeered at us and despised us and said, what is this thing you're doing? Are you rebelling against the king? They can't really do anything. This is a decree from the king. So the best they can do, or I should say the worst they could do, is try to intimidate them. I mean, you don't casually throw around the words rebelling against the king. And if somebody starts a rumor to that effect, it's not going to end well for you if the king believes it. But Nehemiah says the God of heaven will make us prosper, and we, his servants, will arise and build. But you have no portion or right or claim, otherwise known memorial, in Jerusalem. He is not daunted. The work will go forward. But not without its difficulties. Next week, we'll be looking at Nehemiah 3 and 4, the work process, the rebuilding. A lot of it is just a bunch of names, right? But the names themselves tell a story. And the opposition also turns out to be an opportunity to see God at work in his people's faithfulness. That's next week.